Morning to everybody joining. Just a sound check. You can check your sound is working and your volume is up. Good seeing everybody joining. Just give us a few minutes so that we can allow a lot of people into this meeting. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the session. We're still admitting a lot of people into this event, but while we're doing that, let's start with a little bit housekeeping. Today is the 6th of November, 2025. The topic is reform or retreat, and I will leave the rest to our MC, Dr. Unita Maria, who will share just now more about today and what's going to happen. Ladies and gents, as usual, please keep yourselves on mute. Otherwise, I'll have to mute you. And you're welcome to use the chat room to talk to each other, exchange contact details, network. You're welcome to do that. The request is just if you have discussions, please keep the discussions related to the topic being discussed today. We'll really appreciate that. We also not encourage questions during the event. Otherwise, it's going to take too long. So we keep the questions and answers for the end of the event, in which you will have ample opportunity to ask questions to the panelists. Also remember that in the meantime, you're welcome to post questions to the panelists in the chat room, and where possible, they will already start answering you. So when we get to the Q&A session, hopefully, most of those questions will be answered already. So getting back to our host, we hosted by the Southern African Association of Freight Forwarders. We're very proud. Thank you very much for Andrea and Jerisita, all the work you guys have been doing, and Dr. Unita Maria for mentoring me also and putting this program together. We really appreciate that. Let's have a look at our program quickly. Okay, so there is our program, and you can see we're going to take a comfort break at about 10 o'clock. You're welcome then to quickly grab a cup of coffee at a time, and we're planning to be done at about 11:30. Ladies and gents, it's important for us to give recognition to the forum sponsors. As you know, all our events are complimentary. So if you look on the screen, you'll see in the center, there's a block. And the top there is Southern African Association of Freight Forwarders. These are formal bodies that's in a formal relationship with the Transport Forum. Obviously, there are many others involved as well, but these industry bodies are in a formal relation with the Transport Forum. So it's SAAFF, and it is the Road Freight Association, South African Bus Operators Association, African Road Industry Association, Safer Stops Association, Multimodal Inland Port Association, International Women in Transport, and the South African Express Parcel Association. Also, you'll see that the top there, C-Track, is the platinum sponsor of the Transport Forum. Obviously, there is space for more platinum sponsors, but on this stage, we've got them. They've been involved from the very start of this Transport Forum. And then we've got in a block there, we've got formal agreements with certain media houses, proudly supporting this Transport Forum for many years, like the Railways Africa magazine, Freight News, Engineering News, focus on transport and logistics. And we're very proud in having been part of this and giving exposure to this platform. Then you'll see we've got gold sponsors: Bird Air Cargo, Control Fleet, Institute for Transport and Logistics Studies of University of Johannesburg, Unitrans, Smart Tap, Kuba, Freeway, Standard Bank, Global Trade Solution, Internet of Things Integration, Zutari, JC Auditors, EasyClear, and Data Novel. So these are the gold sponsors. So all these different companies and institutions are making this forum possible for us to have a free platform for all and integrate and collaborate in the industry for many years. So let's give them a big hand and say thanks to our sponsors. We really appreciate their support. Righty, so Engineering News, one of our partners, they usually give us a nice industry update. Let's have a look at the industry update.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Engineering News and Mining Weekly magazine, published on Friday, 7 November 2025. In this week's cover article, Engineering News and Mining Weekly Senior Deputy Editor Online Madeleine Alnaldi focuses on risk mitigation as South Africa opens its rail and port networks to private participants. With state-owned freight logistics group Transnet having turned to the markets to invest in rail and port infrastructure, and the Department of Transport having introduced various reforms to allow for private sector participation in South Africa's logistics system, questions have arisen about the risks of such involvement, particularly regarding private companies' commitment to transformation. The Engineering News features focus on valves, where new valves improve supply and efficiency. Battery energy storage systems, where battery storage is key to powering Africa's renewables future. And bearings and bushes, where a partnership helps to meet increased demand. The Mining Weekly features focus on health, safety and security, where an uptake of life-saving armored solutions increases. This week's business leader is Wojciech Kulma, the MD of BASF South Africa. And in this week's cartoon, the world economy is on a roller coaster ride, yet the stock markets have floated above the fray, buoyed by optimism over the effect AI could have on productivity and innovation. We hope you enjoyed this week's edition of Creamer Media's Engineering News and Mining Weekly. Be sure to subscribe to the magazine that offers you in-depth news about developments in the real economy by emailing subscriptions@creamermedia.co.za. Enjoy the read and see you next time.
Thank you, Engineering News. Great news cap there. I really appreciate that. Ladies and gents, just a quick reminder of the Transfer Forum Business Directory. You can get your company and organization listed for only 450 rands per year. We outsource this to Berlin Bondley Consultant as a BE initiative. You can take a picture there, or afterwards I'll send an email to everybody of you, giving you the feedback on the event and requesting your feedback. And you'll also be requested to indicate whether you want Olga to give you a call to get your organization listed. Very popular business directory. Right, so you can download presentations from the Transfer Forum's website. There it is, transportsic.com. And in the email which will be sent to you, you'll give you information how to access those presentations. Actually, presentations presented over more than 17 years at the Transfer Forum. All right, so when you want to access the presentations, you need to log in on the Transfer Forum website. Should you haven't got an account yet, you can create your own account by clicking on Sign Up. And the Sign Up will then give you access to a little registration screen. That's all complimentary. Create your own login credentials, and then you can log in. Once you've logged in, you go to events, you tick downloads. Once you click downloads, you open up that second screen. It's a little search engine, very powerful. Two ways you can search for information. The top field there, find by title or description. You type in a person's name or a topic or whatever, and you hit search. It will search through more than 900 presentations, giving you the relevant information. Or you can go to category and you can select the day's date and hit search, and there you go. You've got your presentations. Very, very powerful. Right. So that brings us back to the program, and I would now proudly hand you over to our MC, Dr. Unita Maria, the Chief Executive Officer of Southern African Association of Freight Forwarders. Thank you so much, Unita.
Thank you, Harry. I hope I'm audible. If you just can confirm for me.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. I hope you're seeing this exciting program in front of you. So maybe, if Harry, if you just can flight it. So what we try to do today is we're bringing up Claude, and he's, as you all know, very thought-provoking leadership, a role that he plays in South Africa. And he always takes us back to what do we need to do, what is the core pillars, and are we in a la-la land, if my words, or are we looking at the real facts? So we thought it was very important to bring him online, and he wants to discuss with us around about 20 minutes what is his ideas, thoughts, and where does he think we are in South Africa, and are we on the right path towards growth. Then we want to bring in Chris. I work with him 24 months in the NLCC, and he's specifically looking at reform, and also he will share his insights with us to say that, and it was actually quite nice when we look at the media clip, that what is PSP, are there risks, and can we address the risk appropriately. Then after that, we will have a quick comfort break. Then we will bring in Brenda, and Brenda's specifically going to focus on the Container User Forum, which was really a path towards growth that we're taking from the NLCC, but it's actually a different way that we want to look at the container sector. And you probably would ask, why container sector? Because 80% of our cargo that's coming in and out the country is moved by the sea modality. So we thought it was very important to bring Brenda online. And then lastly, we bring in Dr. Jacob, and it's my privilege to work with him on a daily basis in the supply chain. And he's going to look at it much more to say that if we look at the supply chain, it's important to look at empirical data and ensure that our decision making is grounded on facts and not how we feel, but make sure that we build with responsibility, because SA Inc. is important for all of us, and we South Africans. And yeah, we are in a very turmoil environment currently, but we believe if we have the flag of hope, the agility and sustainability, we will be able to build our country again to where it should be. So with that, colleagues, I'm going to hand over to Claude, and he said to me yesterday when we prepped, he's not going to do a presentation, he's going to talk to us because he wants to make sure that we understand the viewpoint that he looked at when he touched with different thought leaders in South Africa. So Claude, it's our privilege to host you, and over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Juanita. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes,
can
we
see
can.
you, and yeah.
And you can see that I'm not shaved this morning.
Yeah, Claude, maybe you can just speak a little bit closer to the microphone.
Yeah. I always have a little bit of a problem with this microphone. Is this any better?
That's better, thank you.
Okay, so I'll speak. I'm just going to remove myself from the camera being too close. I don't want to be in your faces.
No, we don't mind. We don't mind. Please stay there.
Okay. All right. So thank you for having me, colleague. It's been a little while since I've spoken at the Transport Forum or with SAAFF. A lot has happened since then in South Africa and in the world. Some of it for the worst, a lot of it for the worst, some of it for the better. And I think comparatively, South Africans can look at the situation they face at home and give themselves a pat on the back for the hard work that has been done, more or less for the past year and a half. I'm the first one to acknowledge this great progress, considering that I was one of the early warning analysts who said that South Africa was on the path to state failure a few years ago. And I think the data shows that we've bought ourselves a few years, and we have to commend those who have done the work in government and in business to arrest some of the worst elements of decline. And the data shows that in terms of the trajectory, South Africa's path to state failure has, stopped. But it's too early to congratulate ourselves in the long term. What we've been able to do is we've been able to look at the situation of crisis and agree that it was a very serious crisis and something needed to be done. But as I've been saying to government and business leaders, South Africa is very good at avoiding the worst scenario throughout its history, but it's not always been successful at crafting a long-term path of sustainable and inclusive economic growth and development. So if we were to project the growth trajectory from where we are now and what we've done, the data shows that we will remain stuck at around 1.5%. Push it 2%, but it's unlikely given the international geopolitical circumstances. Trade wars, instability, wars, uncertainty. And the fact that investors are putting their money in the American stock market, but not really investing. So South Africa needs to really get beyond crisis management. And we need to have on the horizon a very clear sense of urgency and risk. And the greatest concern I have is that these reforms that have been undertaken are too few and they are too dependent on the political situation. So most of those reforms arise from Operation Vulindlela, and most of them rest at the presidency, which means that if there were to be, and there will be, because Ramaphosa cannot run for a third term. So when there is a political change, the question on my mind is who is going to take over and what are they going to do? So the few conversations I've had with the CEOs of Transnet and of ESCOM have been around when do you reach that point of reform that what you achieved cannot be undone by whoever comes next if they want to undo it. Now, the word of caution is 2005, 2006, 2007, where South Africa had the winds in its tail and was doing very well, and yet the Zuma state capture project was manifesting itself, and all of those institutions and all those policies that had been built with great effort by the Mbeki administration were undone like that. So we need to be alive to the fact that this state capture in one way or another is possible again. And we need to be alive of the fact that it happens extremely quickly and extremely easy. And here I'll point out to another example of state capture that's happened at an incredible pace and seems to be going unstopped and untrammeled, which is state capture by the Trump administration in the US, where just about everybody from Congress to the public service to the courts are just looking. And it's up to the citizens, and we saw that yesterday in the elections in New York, California, and elsewhere, that it's up to the citizens to be active. And businesses are citizens. Businesses have an obligation. We don't want to go back there. We want to make sure that the reforms that have started are locked in. But we need to be aware of the dangers or the uncertainties at work in the near future. Then I'll conclude in one point, and I can open for questions and conversation. It costs a lot more to fix a crisis than to avoid one. The rule of thumb is that it's about 10 times more expensive to fix a crisis than to avoid one. And it makes sense, right? If ESCOM had not been broken in the first place, not only would we not have had to bail it out, massive amount of money, but on top of that, it would have been producing a lot more electricity at a much cheaper price, which would have had an immensely positive effect on the economy and therefore on your business. I don't think it's exaggerated to say that the ESCOM crisis was absolutely devastating to the economy, not to say to the reputation of the country, to investment, not to say to its people and the daily lives of South Africans. And I think it bears saying that had it not been broken, the economy would have grown, at around 1.5%, 2% per annum. This thing has changed 1%, 0.5% directly, 1%, 1.5% indirectly to the economy year on year. Now you multiply that by Transnet and the ports and the railway and the roads, and then you take the municipal government, which is and remains a locus of state capture. And Operation Bulindela is going to try to reform that. But I have great doubt that they're going to succeed, because the number of vested interests are just enormous. So we need to find a way to entrench reform and then to make sure that what happened in the past does not happen again. And that's extremely difficult, because when people decide to vote for a political party or a president whose very program is state capture, and they voted for it, how do you fight that? That's a question I want to leave you guys, because it's a conversation. It's a question that concerns all of us as citizens, as members of the society. So my point is, we're not out of the wood. There's political uncertainty coming up, and true reform has to pass through reforming the public sector, so that the public sector cannot be captured again, or it makes it very difficult to capture. Look at what's happening at the police, right? I mean, we have a criminal state in our police force right now, not 5 years ago, not 10 years ago, right now. So, Juanita, I'm saying well done, but we've walked 20% of the journey. And so we must remain highly mobilized, and we must work with government, and we must help them reform the private sector, but we must not be lulled into false confidence. Thank you.
Lord, before we open to questions, because I'm sure the colleagues want to engage with you, what would be your 3 steps? Because you said we must make sure that we understand the urgency and the risk in reform, and we must also make sure that we bring sustainability in reform. So what would you give us the guidelines, if you can just maybe summarize it? What would be the 3 guidelines to help us? Because, you know, logistics is very much in reform, and we don't want to do reform if it's not sustainable.
No, we want to reform. I think every baby step is taken. But I would say there's been little reform, and there's been a lot of crisis management stabilization, right? I do feel that the opening of the market on railway side is reform, because what is reform, right? Reform is changing the roles and responsibilities of doing something in an economy. So reform means changing the way the system works. And to some extent, therefore, there is reform: the opening of the electricity market, the separation of ESCOM transmission and ESCOM production, the opening of rail lines specifically to competition. These are reforms, but they're very, very narrow reforms. The big reforms that we need to see haven't happened yet. And that's political. We're not touching anything that labor unions don't want to reform. So we really need to have a conversation with labor unions. They are a major stumbling block against reform. That's one. The second one is we need to work with, for instance, there's the New South Institute, which has been instrumental in the public sector reform agenda and the professionalization of the public sector. They need funding support, and they're not getting it. Yet, reforming the public sector and creating a unified public sector is vital to the performance of local government. I mean, local government is where business goes to operate and succeed or fail, right? So I would really encourage the members and the association to start thinking about local government reform. And again, Juanita, I'll organize, if you want, a conversation with the New South Institute. It's really important to help them. The third element for me is, I say labor unions, government reforms, then I think there needs to be a more reform. I would like to see in your sector, I'd like to see Transnet disappear. Or I'd like to see Transnet really compete. I'd like to see, because nothing prevents Transnet from being captured again. It would happen through changes on the board appointment and CEOs, and it would be done in 24 hours. As long as the economy depends in critical ways on parastatals that are entirely governed by government, if that government is corrupt, or if that government is intended on undoing the reforms of this government, then they will do it. And they will do it faster than you can say when. So I would really push very hard now that you have the national unity and you still have Ramaphosa as president. I would push hard for profound reforms in who owns and operates the key logistics, energy, water assets of these countries. And it's been done. Look, I mean, the state has basically no role, very little role in telecommunications, for instance. And so telecom functioned just fine during state capture, because all the state could do was refuse to license them and open up the spectrum or not. ICASA could be a pain in the, but the telecom operators were working. That's where we need to get to in terms of the rest of the economy, the critical sectors.
Thank you, Claude. Let's see if there's some questions for you from the audience. I don't know if they can raise their hands. Harry, you will help me with that as well.
Sure, Unita, people can raise their hands and then we will acknowledge them, then they can ask a question.
See, Claude, I don't know if you would be able to see in the Wolf. Maybe if you can ask the question. Yes, I see your hand. So welcome. Over to you, Wolf.
Thanks, Shanita. Thank you very much, colleagues, for putting this together. Always much appreciated. We circulated it to members, and it's very useful to have this. Yes, just a question for Claude. We have great concern around local government service delivery and rural infrastructure because of the impact on the agribusiness sector. And solvency in local government is a particularly worrying item, but it is also particularly difficult to solve. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that, because it seems to me that's a soft underbelly of our sort of fiscal stability overall. And for us as agribusiness, it's a major concern. Thank you.
Yeah. Look, I'm a big fan of what you guys do at agribusiness. You've been a great player in the economy and keeping the rural environment somewhat functional where you can. I don't have an easy answer, because if we look at government expenditure over the past few years, we've clearly seen a decline in government expenditure in the parastatals, and that being somewhat replaced, but not yet by private sector expenditure. And as I said, that needs to be opened even more. The problem, and then we're seeing government expenditure, budgetary expenditure for local government exploding. But we are not seeing results in terms of the quality of local government. And as some observers, and I say, well, this is state capture number 3 taking place. And I'm afraid that to say that there is clearly an unspoken kind of agreement within the ANC that they will reform the urban-centered, easy to reform, fairly centralized problem child. And that was not an easy fight to get to reform Transnet, ESCOM, etc. And to try to stabilize the debt. But it's kind of, you pick up your phone, you place a couple of people in high places and you give them marching orders. And eventually our president found the backbone to do that. I think they've decided to kind of not really deal with the local government situation simply because it's a massive bidding job for the ANC cadres, right? You got to give it's a political machine and it's a criminal organization in its, as we can see with the police, right? And I say that, and I've written that, I have no problem saying it because it's proven by the ANC assassinates people and non-ANC people. And so that's the base. That's the political structure, right? That's where people get their jobs and that's where they get their revenues. And that's the machine that greases the political system that continues to vote ANC in overwhelming proportions in the rural world. So that's largely a political problem in terms of the population starting to wake up to what they have or not. And it's also a political problem in terms of the top leadership of the ANC being willing or not willing to take that on. Now, when we see with the police what's happened, don't tell me that it's not known in the ANC quarters and government that the police was corrupt. Come on, everybody knew that what's his name, Chile was a gangster, but it's part of it, right? So business has to push back, but together, not just agribusiness, because a vast part of the population is rural. Now, I go back to what I said. One public sector is what is needed, public sector reform, so that you can fight at the level of each municipality. You must sue incompetent governments, and you must take them to court, and you must obtain punitive financial damages for damages done to your business. You must interdict municipal managers that are incompetent or corrupt, right? You must make it's war at that level. It's a daily war. Now it's dangerous, and I know that, but that's why it's important to go to that war in a very organized way, so that you raise the visibility of the fight, and in raising the visibility of the fight, you protect yourselves. You also obviously have to really support, as I said, the creation of that unified public sector and public sector reform. I am not in favor of subsidizing local governments without a very clear contract and a compact of quality governance and of accountability and of corruption. If you go to them and say, we're going to help you manage, they'll say, oh, yes, and they'll take your money. But they won't give anything back. Yeah, it's a tough one, this one, because it's as you say, it's not just the underbelly, but it's also a fundamental element of the spine of the political system. But it needs to be tackled.
Claude, thank you very much. I think if you can stay on the line, because we have after the comfort break, Brenda and then Jacob, and then we will open up for questions again. And I think also what we will do, and I didn't tell the audience, but we will do the podcast of the questions as well. So if they can post for us questions in the chat box, we'll take it, and then we'll do a podcast on the questions as well, because it's always good to engage with you, hear your thoughts, and I think you sometimes call us up for action, and I think that's what you've done this morning. We need to understand that what is permanent reform, what is crisis, and then also I love your 3 building blocks that we need to tackle on, and we must just mobilize ourselves more in private sector to ensure that we build SA Inc. So with that, I'm going to hand, thank you, Claude. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Chris, because he's going to tell us, Chris, is our reform in the logistics sustainable, or is it risky, or is it just a case of urgency, or do you find some sustainability in the reform that's busy taking place? So can I hand over to Chris? Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Your slides is coming through. It's just not in presentation mode. Perfect. There it is. Thank you very much.
Is it now in presentation mode?
Yes, it is, and
Cool.
you're very audible.
Thanks, Jonita. Claude's inputs has been very insightful and thought-provoking. I suppose to the question of whether we reform or retreat, I think as a country we don't have an option. We need to retreat, but the question is we need to retreat at pace to avoid, as Claude puts it, state capture undoing. So we need to get to a point where we entrench reform and get to a point where we show meaningful benefit for the broader population. So they then can see the importance and the benefits of reform and avoid state capture and reform becoming a political football in the future. So with that, good morning, everyone. It's nice to be here, and thanks for the invitation, Jonita, to share some of my thoughts on reform and how it affects our logistics network.
Chris, can you
what
switch
I
on your
thought-
camera, please? Chris, sorry, can you switch on your camera, please? The video.
Is that
There you
better?
go. Thank you.
Thanks. What I thought we'd do is maybe start off with just sharing a bit on the reform agenda, because I think we're all in a different space when it comes to reform in terms of our understanding and knowledge of what reform's all about in the logistics space and what are the key benefits and objectives we're trying to achieve. So we'll start with that, and then we can go and unpack some of the key pillars and objectives, as well as the building blocks for reform and implications for the network. If we start, sorry, Harry, I can't, oh, there we go. Is my slides moving?
Yes, it is.
Cool, thanks. If you look at it, I think in simple terms, what reform's trying to do is basically look at the challenges we were dealing with as a country. In terms of port and rail specifically, and the key bottlenecks that we experienced, in terms of exports, manufacturing, and economic growth, what reforms are aiming to do is restore freight capacity, attract private capital, and improve efficiency. Now, I think, everyone's had different views of reform, but what's interesting to note as a country, we seem to have this culture where we like to live on edge, where we only engage and focus and get into action when we're in a crisis. And when we're in a crisis as a country, we seem to eventually at some point all come together and focus and driving the same agenda. So even recently, and it's more in the political space, and Claude's better positioned there, but even recently in the ANC 10-point economic revival plan, you'd see from nowhere the reform agenda and the attraction of private capital into the rail space specifically features quite prominently there. But for me, I think in the reform space, and if you want to show the benefits to the larger population, it's not just growth, it needs to be inclusive growth. So we need to see the benefits of the reform in terms of job creation, social upliftment. And if we can demonstrate that, then I think we're on a path of no return in the reform journey. So what does reform means in terms of enabling the South African logistics network? This slide I borrowed, and I'm just reflecting back on some of the work was done at OV with the architects in the presidency of the logistics reform process. And at the time, I think they used this iceberg analogy to share some of the challenges and what reform tried to address. If we look specifically and on the tip of the iceberg, what is obvious to the general public, we've seen over the past while decline in rail volumes, inefficiencies and high cost, and low productivity. So those were the obvious things for all to see. But what was underlying this? And we unpack this in terms of what are the immediate causes that led to that. And what you see is there's been an historic underinvestment in maintenance. So there's inadequate funding, weak implementation capability. We had major issues in terms of procurement and the suitability of public procurement mechanisms to drive an organization like Transnet and its operations. diversion of resources to operational requirements versus investing in the economic infrastructure. Security obviously has been a major challenge, from organized security syndicates attacking our economic infrastructure, cable theft, and the like. Issues with the rolling stock. We know the long story, well publicized in terms of the age of the Transnet fleet. A lot of the locos 40 years over, and the newer locos being challenged with inability to access maintenance contracts and parts to bring those long-standing locomotives back into operations. We're also plagued with a lot of operational inefficiency issues. It's quite clear that both on the port and the rail side, we were way below international benchmarks in terms of whether it's train turnaround times, gross crane moves per hour, etc. Now, what we have done, and some excellent work in the Transnet environment with the current management team, Solly and Michelle, as well as their teams, working very closely and in collaboration in the NLCC structure with their customers, with big business in B4SA, as well as government. We've managed to arrest a lot of these immediate causes. So what you saw in the last while, from a high of 226 odd million tons on rail, we declined all the way to around 140 million tons. But the last 2 or 3 years, we've turned the corner, and we're starting now to see an increase in rail volumes again. But we're nowhere out of the woods, as we say, in that there's much more work to be done. So a lot of these immediate causes have not completely been addressed. The journey has started, but there's still a lot of work to be done. The biggest challenge we have at the moment is getting investment into the space to deal with a lot of these issues. At the moment, in terms of the current structure, it's very much reliant on Transnet. And the current Transnet balance sheet doesn't allow us to actually deal with a lot of these matters. So the importance of private sector investment is absolutely critical. So if you look even further beyond that, why did we get to these immediate causes? There's much more deeper rooted issues. And these are the structural causes we speak about. And I think this is where reform specifically is going to play a major role. I think there's a lot of issues on governance, and Claude is talking a lot about state capture and how that infiltrated Transnet organizations and other organs of state. Is how do we put proper checks and balances in place to avoid that happening again? It's almost impossible to totally avoid, but with proper economic regulation, greater transparency, the different functions of government performing their roles and not being captured, a lot of that can be addressed. There's also the issue of an unfunded mandate. Forever in time, you'd recall in Transnet, this dual mandate of a developmental mandate as well as a commercial mandate has always been a bugbear in the organization. So we had a point where there hasn't been adequate oversight in terms of the developmental mandate, and we haven't been investing like we should be into the economic infrastructure of the country. A lot of the funding has been focused more in generating operating profits and in the operating divisions of Transnet, where we saw private sector or private revenue coming in, but focus in investing in those operating businesses and not necessarily in the rail infrastructure and in the port infrastructure. So those are some of the systemic issues and structural issues that needed to be addressed within the reform space. If we go a bit further in terms of how reform was basically adopted in terms of a roadmap in Cabinet through the Freight Logistics Roadmap in December 2023, if you think about it, in December 2023 is not even 2 years ago. As much as some people say we haven't reformed quick enough, we as a country have done significant amount of work and achieved a lot in the last 2 years in this pathway through reform. If you look at it on the right-hand side, and just from a governance perspective, if you look at it at a high level, we basically see new coordination and regulatory frameworks under the Transport Economic Regulator that's been recently established and resourced at a board level. We've been a journey to looking at the National Ports Authority as well as the Rail Infrastructure Manager, becoming independent decision-making bodies and not part of a broader Transnet decision-making body. And that's critical to make sure we get the reform agenda on place. On the freight rail side, we've basically seen open access for private train operating companies coming through, and also quite well progress in terms of establishment of what Transnet calls a leasing company for rolling stock. So that is also well progressed. On the port side, we're looking at concessioning in the port terminal space, looking for operating partners in the Transnet environment, but also attracting public-private partnerships. And then finally, on the investment side, is looking at concessioning. And as you're aware, through the DOT PSP unit in collaboration with Transnet, there's a programmatic approach at a corridor level looking at RFIs and eventually RFQs and RFPs to invite private participation in those corridors. So if you go through each of these pillars, and I'm not going to do that now for the sake of time, and if you read through what were the objectives of each of these pillars, you can see the significant progress that have been made. But we're nowhere near where we need to be, to the point where we refer to being entrenched in the economy and we're at a point of no return. That is the critical amount of work that needs to be done in the next while to take us to where we want to be. This is actually a very interesting slide, and I think Claude mentioned, reforms about looking at the roles and responsibilities and who does what. If you look at the rail space, and on the left-hand side, and if you look at the roles of an oversight role, in terms of a regulatory role, infrastructure ownership in rail, infrastructure management, the organization, the responsibility of maintaining the assets and contracting private operators to operate on the assets. And then finally, in the operations role, in the recent past, and I talk recent past, most probably not even a year, we had a situation where the only sort of oversight was through the shareholder organization of Transnet. At that time, it was Department of Public Enterprises and now Department of Transport. And then the rail safety regulator, really focusing on the safety aspects, but no necessarily economic regulation. And Transnet as an organization played all these roles, from infrastructure ownership to the management to the operations. Where do we sit today in a very short space of time? We have the interim rail economic regulator that's been active and addressing the issues in terms of infrastructure management. We've had the separation in Transnet where we've got the Transnet Rail Infrastructure Manager still responsible for the ownership as well as the management of the infrastructure. And then TFR, which was the vertical integrated organization, now specifically focusing on rail operations. And then very recently, we had the conditional approval of 10 private operators, TOCs, being awarded slot capacities onto the network. They're not there operating yet, but basically a major milestone in terms of awarding those slots to private access and private operators. Beyond that, a lot of people will think this is where it could end. But if you look at the reform space, there's going to be a lot of opportunities beyond that. And we could envisage in a future state where we have the Transport Economic Regulator in place and a lot of work that needs to be done there where the interim rail economic regulator as well as the ports regulator gets transitioned into the Transport Economic Regulator. We could see a corporatized public rail infrastructure owner. So an infrastructure agency of government, separate legal entity that sits on its own and could open up the network for many infrastructure managers to perform the infrastructure manager role. One of it could be a public entity, or we could have many other private sector infrastructure managers for different parts of the network. And then obviously, apart from TFR, many private train operating companies. So this is where we could see a pathway for reform, specifically in the rail sector. So you could see where we are versus what the opportunities lie ahead of us. So there's a lot to look forward to and a lot of work to be done for us to get to that end point. What are some of the risks and constraints? And I don't think we need to go too far, but just looking at the port experience. As you would know, in terms of ports, The seaport reform was enacted 20 years ago with the Ports Act, but did we get the desired outcomes from that? And the answer is no. While we did achieve certain things, the true benefits of that reform we had not experienced. And there's always a danger on the rail side, we go down the same path. And some of the challenges we had there, the Transnet National Ports Authority was still part of the Transnet decision-making, which focuses more on driving a Transnet organizational perspective in terms of capital allocation and investments, etc., not an industry SA Inc. viewpoint. So we had a lot of major developments that were stifled. If you think about it in the port space, when last did we have major new terminal development or new port expansions taking place? In the last 20 years, there's been the last major development probably was the Mukha port. So it hadn't had the benefit that we want to see, where we crowded in private investment and private operations in some of the major commercial terminals. We also had a lack of rigorous accountability for existing operational performance targets. You know, when you sit in a situation with a Chinese wall between the operator and the infrastructure provider, it's difficult to hold them to account for non-performance. So in essence, we had a situation where port terminal capacity hasn't really grown in the South African landscape in the last while. We need to get a point where the Port Authority actually enables economic growth. So we need them to think ahead and provide capacity ahead of demand, as opposed to where we sit at the moment and be responding to the needs of the economy, as opposed to leading and enabling it. Apart from that, there's obviously some other major risks and constraints. I think from an execution point of view, we've spoken quite a bit about the political aspects and the labor challenges. But again, here, there's a lot of work being done in the reform space, in the Millennium Labour Council, to take labor through the benefits of reform, the job creation opportunities, and the inclusive growth that it could bring. But at the same time, we need to look at the capability and capacity in South Africa to execute what reform would bring in and major investments that would come with it. In the medium term, I think we're going to have issues in terms of coordination gaps between Transnet and private operators until we find each other. We obviously have a challenge in terms of financial pressure on the current Transnet balance sheet and the investment that we need to do in the backlog of infrastructure. Security and vandalism, as much as we've dealt with at a systemic level to a certain degree, there's still a lot of hotspots in the network that needs to be addressed. So that will always remain as a serious risk for the future. And then obviously, very importantly, regulatory uncertainty. Are we going to continue on this path we are on, or is it going to become a political football, as I call it? So that's a potential risk for future investment into the network. Some of the benefits of reform, which we can look forward to if we get it right, is critically on all our major freight corridors, an increase in throughput and service levels, which I think will benefit everyone. From reliability, predictability, and cycle times on the main corridors that we speak about. On the port terminal side, we can also look at the improvement in productivity. If you just look at in the last while, since we identified and established the crisis committees to the National Logistics Crisis Committee, and we've seen the investments taking place in port equipment, there's been a drastic improvement in the productivity levels, especially in our container terminals. And this, what can happen if we get the right investments into the space. We also look forward to an improvement in the integration between ports, logistics hubs, and industrial and manufacturing development zones. And we'll unpack that slightly a bit more on the right-hand side now when we talk about where the true benefits would be. There's potential to attract about 100 billion rand of private capital, not only in infrastructure, but also with a private train operating coming in and investing in rolling stock. And then obviously the main benefit is to see the reversal of the modal shift back to rail. So from that, we should be looking at reduced cost of logistics and improved efficiencies, improved international competitiveness. All of these things contribute to economic growth and job creation. But some interesting work done by the B4SA team in the recent thing, and it's still work in progress, but I thought it's important to share. As you probably have seen in the press, the Minister of Transport has given the industry a target, a very ambitious target, to say, can we get to 250 million tons on rail by 2030? Now, if you think at the moment, most probably at this financial year for Transnet, they'll get to around 170. It's a steep ask of 80 million tons additional volume on the current rail network. It will require obviously significant investment in the rail infrastructure. But where you've got limited capital and you've got so many initiatives to undertake, where should you focus your energies? There's without doubt, if you look at this quadrants where you've got on your horizontal axis looking at revenue for the different commodities per metric ton, and on the vertical axis, you basically got the number of jobs created or basically in those sectors per metric ton. You clearly see on the bottom left-hand side, in terms of low employment intensity and low revenue, is most of the bulk commodities. And this is where rail is obviously got a competitive advantage, and where it's a backbone to our economy, and where we need to still make sure we support it. But the opportunity for growth there is very limited. If you look at how we grow from 170 to 250, a lot of that growth is going to be in the general freight business. And this is where we're talking about the automotive sector, chemicals, manufacturing, agriculture, forestry. And what's good about this is the area of the economy that creates the most jobs. So next on the agenda, we have Brenda talking about the Container User Forum. It's about focusing, how do we get the intermodal business working on rail? At the moment, because of the priority in these commodities, Transnet is actually not focused on that. And that's where there's real opportunity for the private sector to come in and invest, both in the infrastructure and opening up those corridors, in inland terminals, back of port areas, as well as rail services for the intermodal business. And it will then feed that inclusive growth that we talk about. So there's huge opportunities for reform in that particular space. Just some quick building blocks for reform.
Chris, I just want to, because I mean, I don't want us to run out of time, and there's one of two questions for you. So maybe if you can take us quickly through that one, and then we address the two questions, and then we have a comfort break. Thank you.
Cool, thanks. In the short term, a lot of the good work that started can only be, we only can see the benefit we close the gap. And I'm not going to go into the medium term. Let's just quickly look at some of the short term ones. We need to get the network statements, the revised versions of that, to a point where it's bankable, where the private train operators can actually invest. At the moment, the version that's on the table is not quite there. Secondly, we need to make sure in the entire network, we have a common understanding of the current condition of the network. So the independent technical assessments is critical. Leveraging surplus rolling stock to the leasing company and making sure they're available to private operators to reduce the barrier of entry is absolutely critical. We're aware of the RFQ, RFP process, which needs to be progressed with great pace. And then also critically here is the transport economic regulator playing their role. We need to capacitate that organization beyond and below the board level. And finally, we've got to look forward to the National Rail Master Plan being published, which will set the technical standards that we're going to adopt on the network going forward. There's benefits for everyone. I'm not going to read through that. You guys could read through that when the presentation's sent out. In conclusion, I think reform is an exciting journey. If we all can focus and avoid the politics and put our energies, it's a benefit for everyone in terms of all the stakeholders in this particular space, but most importantly for all South Africans. Thanks, Unita. Sorry for running over.
No, I mean, we will listen to you all day long because you're full of insights. I just want to ask you, maybe there's a question from one of the colleagues that was asking you about the deep berthing. I don't know, if you just can look quickly. That was just quite interesting. Maybe if you can address that. I just want to go scroll down. I don't know, maybe maybe the hand is up of the colleague that want to ask you the question. Can you see the question, Chris? It was something on the berth deepening in Durban.
I also have a question, but I can't work out how to raise my hand.
Okay, please, you go, Sandra, while we're quickly locating the other question. So please go ahead.
Shall I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Okay, Chris, thanks very much for such a comprehensive overview. We know there's a lot of planning underway in terms of the national roadmap and also the National Rail Master Plan. You've indicated the importance of development at the ports and port terminals, and also I think you mentioned the need for connectivity to inland industrial hubs and terminal logistics hubs. Do you believe that there's sufficient planning at a national level for a network of intermodal terminals that connect to rail, which is obviously an enabler for general freight as well? Right now we're seeing a lot of private sector development, Port of Gauteng, Tambo Springs, Swanee Logistics Hub. What sort of planning is there to integrate these to make sure that they're in the right place and that there's proper connectivity that enables this growth?
Sandra, I think a critical question, and I don't think the current, we now again speak without having sight of the National Rail Master Plan, and I don't know to what extent it deals with an integrated transport master plan. But this is one of the things we've highlighted as a potential gap. We know the Department of Transport has been dealing with it, but until we get access to that and we can then, I think, as a community, interrogate it, but I think that's been definitely lacking. And we need to get access to it. And once we do that, I think we can basically give our responses and close that gap. But for now, I think you're right. I think that's still a gap in the system.
Maybe, Chris, if I just can add there, because Sandra, I had a discussion with Jaap yesterday, because they're doing the RFIs, and what he indicated to us is that they sent the comment, or they open it up to us now, and we can comment until the 15th of December. But what his idea is that we need to do a straw man of how do we think the intermodal needs to work with the freight villages, Caterham, Kaalfontein, the Gauteng hub. And then once we understand how the straw man is looking, we need to build in the building blocks. So I think we definitely will engage further on this subject, because we want to make sure that the multimodal structure is working, because as Chris indicated, that's where the economy is going to grow, and that makes us very exciting. So, colleagues, with that, I'm going to give you 10 minutes, if that's fine. If we can come back at 10:15, so that gives us, if my watch is just maybe to run quickly for a cup of coffee or a comfort break, and then we come back at 15 minutes past 10. Thank you very much. Right, colleagues, I hope you've got all a cup of coffee or tea or ginger tea with you. So let me go to the second phase of the program. And I want to introduce you to Brenda, because I think we discussed on Claude is that reform, and he actually really alert us to the urgency and the risk. I think Chris have done very well to explain to us how can we make sure that the roles and the responsibility is bringing in sustainability. And I think in my mind, it's always back, and I don't know what the colleagues think on the line, but I've got a hope in the economic regulator. I hope that can be good structure, and we must maybe just, as in private sector, be very vocal on how do we want the economic regulator to fulfill its role. But we don't want to stop the conversation here. I'm just going to hand over quickly to Teresita before I hand to Brenda. Just explain the container user forum, and then we'll go to Jacob. But maybe if Teresita just wants to explain to us what do we want to take further from this session, because we thought this session a very important building blocks that we don't want to leave in the air, but we want to ground them further and make sure that they can take traction. So Teresita, can I hand over to you just on some of the ideas that we want to do?
Thank you very much, Jonita. Do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. So a very good morning to one and all, and congratulations to Transport Forum and SAAFF for this very insightful and I think very consequential conversation. It is indeed, I think, the better national conversation that I've heard so far. And I think that SAAFF appreciates the critical importance of developing this conversation and taking not only the opportunity to get all the answers to the questions that have been posed, but in fact to welcome and bring in other questions that will arise from the study of the notes of this meeting and the messages that have been delivered. And for that purpose, then we propose that we will produce a series of podcasts with the speakers and other guest speakers as we develop the conversation. And we'll send you invitations not only to connect with the podcasts, but have a wrap-up session before the end of the year where we can revisit every one of these very important guidelines that have arisen today. So with that, we will use the SAAFF communications channels and the Transport Forum, of course, and keep you informed and involved. Thank you, Jonita.
Thank you, Teresita. I think we all used to Teams. So Harry is actually pushing our capability when we work on Zoom. So I was just quickly finding the unmute button in the video. So colleagues, I want to hand over to Brenda, because I think there was also some exciting news in terms of the private sector and what we can do. And as colleagues probably will recall, it's the same Brenda that had the Cape Town terminal the best in one of the best in the world. Am I right, Brenda? You can tell the audience when, but they probably will ask me if it's the same Brenda, and I will definitely tell them unequivocally it is the same Brenda. Over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Janita. Yes, it's the same Brenda. Maybe I should just do my camera quickly.
Yes, the slides are on and your camera, so you can continue. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Janita, to respond to you and Harry's question, we believe that, yes, South Africa is strong enough. It's at the inflection point to unlock growth and sustainability. It is the fertile ground, yes, taking into consideration what the two speakers said before me, to caution us in terms of what needs to be done and maintained, what we need to get rid of in South Africa to ensure that there's sustainability in what we put in place. We believe that we are at the point where South Africa is a fertile ground to set up structures, systems, and strategies in place that will stimulate growth, and at least for the container sector, and ensure that we never experience some of the shocks that we experience in the system, and we safeguard the challenges that we're experiencing at this point in time. And I believe that we could do it together between ourselves and the private sector and the government. So to just explain what is the CUF. The CUF, it's one of its first kind in South Africa, in Southern Africa. It's a container user forum. We call it CUF. It represents a groundbreaking industry-led initiative which is designed to transform container logistics through collaborative action. It unites the full spectrum of stakeholders. We already have stakeholders in the sector. We have shipping lines, terminals, cargo owners, and technology providers, all of them working in their own sector. So we bring them under one unified platform, a space for stakeholders in the container sectors to pull together resources and work together. I'll explain as I go through my presentation how we intend to do so. What has been happening in other corridors? The bulk sector have the user forums, but the container sector hasn't had the user forum, which is what I said earlier. In the bulk sector, you find that they are organized better and they pull together the resources. For example, the ore export corridor, they have a formal export corridor users forum, which coordinates producers and drive all rail reforms with clear structure, membership, and objectives. You also, in the manganese sector corridor, you have a coordinated producer forum, consortium partners to match rail port capacity to demand and set partnership standards. Coal also has their own forum. So the coal and iron exporters co-fund agreements with Transnet to repair lines, for example, and raise throughput. And this is demonstrating a single industry voice which can mobilize capital at corridor level and are able to achieve what is required in that sector. When you come to the container sector, you realize that we're not organized in that way. We are fragmented. There are structures that are existing. For example, the SASOA, you have SAAFF, you have MAPA. They handle advocacy and member services, but there's no neutral and end-to-end delivery vehicle or unit to run across modal projects, align KPIs, and publish the results. So there isn't what you find in other corridors. This is where we found the gap as a container user forum and realized that there's a need to fill a gap here, which is critical. These parties are playing a very, I must mention so that it doesn't sound like we believe that the container user forum is an end all. The structures that are existing, the sectoral structures, are playing a critical role. Some of them have been existed for the longest time and have put value in the system. And it is important that we coexist with them. The only thing that we would do as a container user forum is to ensure that we pull together like other corridors and become a very strong united force to deliver the hub for container initiatives across shipping lines, port, rail, roads, and back of port operations. So that is what we're trying to answer here by bringing a container user forum. So we are not reinventing what doesn't exist. We already have learned from other corridors and seen the strength that they've brought into their system by collaborating efforts and ensure that they run with mega projects that derive value and bring through efficiencies in their system. So I've already explained what these other structures exist in the system. And the associations that I've listed, and listed just a few, they're not end all. But I'm saying these platforms, while they're existing and doing the work that they do, they are critical and important, and we must continue with the work that they're doing and continue doing the work that they do. But we come in as a CUF, as a cross-industry unit where all initiative where all cargo owners, budgets, and we ring-fence common fund for execution, which is done in other sectors. We also provide one truth in terms of the data that is allowed to global strata, even superior to that. For example, we've seen a situation where there are different data that relates to container sector, but now there's nowhere where you can pull that data and say, this is one single truth. The CUF will set up a structure within the CUF to ensure that it's a structure that pulls the information, and any of the members that part of the CUF can pull the data from the single truth. The other unique advantage that we're bringing in is a CUF, it's neutral, convening a power for trade-offs decisions. And we also competition law guardrails when we bring competition law guardrails with formal protocols. So as I said earlier, the association must continue to advocate. The CUF will complement with implementation. So together with the existing platforms, we can continue to pool resources and work in a collaborative fashion. So we need to also, in the recent past, to maintain the momentum, which is a critical window to pivot. This is what we believe in the CUF. The container logistic industry stands at the critical inflection point, like I said earlier. The recent global disruption exposed the system weaknesses. Because we are not coordinated and not pulling together, we couldn't absorb the shock effectively. So we believe that the work that has been bedded, that has been put in place already, the collaboration between the state and the business through the NLCC has demonstrated that the collaboration can help us, especially to achieve the efficiencies that we require in the system. I'll take the example, the record performance that we've seen recently from the port terminals. If everyone remembers, by November 2023, there was a crisis, and I mustn't dwell too much on that. My colleagues have spoken about the crisis in South Africa and how we manage ourselves through crisis. We don't want to see that going into the future. We need to plan ahead and put this thing systematically so that we don't go through that. But the beauty of the record performance that I'm going to share with you is that even though we went through that crisis, we were able to come out of that crisis. If you see the performance and the results that have been coming through the port terminals show that there is an opportunity to do better and be more efficient when we collaborate. For example, prior years, the terminals were performing at 65,000 TEUs per week. Since July 2025, we've seen continuous consistency in terms of performance. We've seen the performance levels of 90,000 TEU continuously. And in September, we had the highest performance of 103,000 TEUs. And all of this work is a collaboration, this performance, a collaboration between private sector and government. The TPT chief executive had attested to this, that the performance that they see in TPT, it's because of the collaboration between TPT, labor partners, shipping lines, cargo owners, logistics stakeholders. And without institutionalizing this achievement, this model that we are standing at this point in time, we lose to gain what we've pulled together. So we see this is an important time to set up this CUF so that we can ride on that wave and continue and ensure that there's sustainability. We're not riding freely. We put systems in place, like I said, strategies in place to ensure that the sustainability continues and that we have the right platform where all of us converge and share the resources and pool conversations and come with conversations that are important that will take the container logistics supply chain forward. If you have to remember anything that I've said today about what CUF, without listening to everything that I've said before getting to this slide, it is that we've been fragmented and we've gone through the shock. which is a challenge. We've gone through the shock. Some of the shock in our system was pandemic in 2020, geopolitical tensions that affected the container sector. At some point in time, we were worried about the volume, whether it will come through to South Africa or not. The disruptions exposed that there were weaknesses in the container sector logistics. So we've now have proven collaboration through the NLCC work that we've done as a container sector team, that it is possible to be successful when we pull together as a team. So during this recent crisis, we have learned that there's more we can do as a united front instead of a team that is fragmented. Now I'm referring to the container sector, that instead of working in our little corners, the terminals are putting their funds in dealing with the terminals only. The shipping lines are doing their own thing, and yet nobody is looking at the entire container logistics supply chain. So if you could remember anything that I've said, is that this is a unique moment to formalize a neutral, execution-focused platform for lasting system improvements before the momentum dissipates. So for us, it is important that the CUF kicks in now and ensure that we put all these mega projects in place to take the container sector forward. Now, the vision for the CUF, just to share a little bit without talking too much, we need to, we see ourselves as a unified voice that will coordinate and align stakeholders for collective advocacy and ensure that the industry speak in one powerful voice. We would like to see operational excellence adopt and implement people, process, technology solutions to drive measurable improvements across the container networks. We've seen this works from time to time. Now we need to ensure that it is embedded. The policy influence would like to inform reforms for transport and logistics, shaping regulatory framework and that support efficient operations in the container networks. Our biggest stream also is regional integration, where we would position South Africa as a definitive regional logistic hub, attracting investment and trade flows, which is something that is very, very embedded in the CUF. We are outcome focused and we have measurable impact areas. The CUF board and the members teams, they lead initiatives across critical outcome areas, each with specific measurables. I won't go to the details. I'll just list what are these. In the 6 areas, it's operational efficiency, back of port fluidity, rail and intermodal growth, data transparency, skills and system uplift, collaboration and governance. All of these are underpinned by research and analytics, which will take place under the CUF research unit, which I've mentioned earlier. Now we come to the exciting part, where all of you might now see that there's an opportunity for everyone that is in the room to become a member of the CUF. We have a tiered membership structure, which looks as follows. We have a strategic tier, we have a core tier, we have network tier, and we have associate member, sorry. The tiered membership structure ensures that the organizations of all sizes and interests can derive maximum value from their engagement with the Container User Forum, the CUF. So the strategic tier may give a board seat, branding policy, input, core leadership on initiatives, while the core tier will give members, key operators who need data, advocacy, and collaboration, and working group participation. Network tier, it will give access to insights, training, and networking. Associate members will get, colleagues, will get will ensure inclusivity, engagement, and influence. So you'd have to find the right fit because each tier is designed to offer specific advantages and ensuring that investment directly translates into meaningful engagement and impact. This is critical for us, that you take an opportunity to see yourselves in the spaces, in the 4 spaces, and what would work for your organization and what would add more value for your own organization. So, in closing, I would say the SAAFF pivoting the industry at the inflection point to ensure growth and sustainability in the container sector. It's one neutral voice. It's ring-fenced. It's measured results. It's your seat at the table. And I would like to end there. Juanita, thank you very much.
Thank you, Brina. I think the colleagues is probably shocked because that's really something that Claude and Chris was talking on, that we want to make sure that the reform is sustainable. And I think with the Container User Forum, we definitely from private sector put emphasis on that to make sure that the reform is sustainable and that we work on those blocks. And I think whenever you have done and when we engage around the world, there is not a structure that we form like this in South Africa, where you have the shipping lines, the back of port operations, the freight villages, the freight forwarders, customs brokers, the rail users, and I think so beautifully that you have all the end cargo owners, which is the NAMSA, the agricultural, the chemical industry, the fuel industry, the forest industry, all in one structure, talking to the container sector and how it's moving into a regional hub. So I think it's actually a beautiful evolution and it can take mega projects forward. And I think also if we take the lessons learned from the container, from the, let's say, the INO User Forum and the Richards Bay coal terminal, we definitely can make sure that our net core line comes back to full productivity, and then also the central corridor. And when we look at the Cape Town, it's much more the Balcon facility, but we also link up with the rail linkage between the Eastern Cape and the Western Cape. So Brina, thank you very much with that. And then I want to hand over to Jakob, because maybe we talk about reform the logistics, but then the World Bank comes and rank us the bottom of the pile. So Jakob, are we really the bottom of the pile when we have so many exciting things going on and we want to pride ourselves that we look at empirical data? So I think the audience is actually in for a retreat to hear your view on, are we the bottom of the pile in the world? Thank you, and then I hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Juanita, and it's a pleasure to be here with very, very much an esteemed panel of colleagues. I want to try and share. Please let me know when that's coming through.
Almost there. Perfect.
So thanks again, colleagues, for this opportunity to add to this very important dialogue and discourse in this space. I think it's very important that we realize the fact that in the last 5 years or 10 years or so, South African logistics has been under intense scrutiny. In fact, if we just compare ourselves to 10 years ago, we performed much better. And during this time, this intense scrutiny of, say, the last 5 years or so, a very important institution with an important global, let's call them a management consultancy firm, have created a report that's really zoomed in on container port performance in not only our landscape, but indeed the global landscape throughout. So what we are going to do today is to zoom in on this case study of the World Bank and S&P Global's Container Port Performance Index and see, as Juanita mentioned, are we really the bottom of the pile? And what I want to highlight here today is how it is critically important to use empirical decision-making and analysis to understand what is going on in the broader space of where we are all functioning in trade, transport, logistics. So as I've mentioned, in the last 5 years, we've really been in the doldrums, so to speak, with our logistics network. Not only ports, rail, of course, not only containers, bulk commodities, of course. And during this time, the World Bank created this report, the Container Port Performance Index, which, as it says, is trying to benchmark container port performance. But what it actually does, and I'll speak to that later, it should actually be called a Container Port Efficiency Index. But in any case, this is the 5th iteration of this report and looks at 2024 data. And this is very important as part of this discussion. So just as an overview, what is critical for me to convey today is I want to start off with explaining exactly what the CPPI measures and equally what it does not measure. Look at how South Africa featured within this space and this report, and then also to look at some various improvements that have taken place subsequently and to look where we can go from here. It is very curious that this has indeed added a lot to the public discourse in terms of what is happening in our logistics network. And critics of the reformation of the National Logistics Crisis Committee, perhaps some of the reform initiatives from OV, even the restructuring of Transnet, have found themselves linked to this report to say that despite everything that's going on, despite the creation of these structures, the global institutions still rank us as the bottom of the pile. Surely then all is in vain. But is that the entire story? So starting out, it is very important, and colleagues, I have a lot of content here in this slide and throughout this presentation, but I really want to highlight the essence. And starting out with, it's very important that we understand what the CPPI is, what it measures, and what it is not. So at a very underlying emphasis and core, it's a benchmarking tool that measures the time based centered on vessels in port. So perhaps I can say that again. It's a benchmarking tool, a global one that's very comprehensive. How does it do this? With more than 250 odd million moves, 403 ports, more than 1,000 terminals globally. But it's a benchmarking tool that looks at vessel time in port from the arrival to the departure, 6 different steps. And I'll zoom in later in that as well. But as secondary objectives, it also tries to diagnose operational bottlenecks. But it's important here to distinguish between diagnostics in terms of what the problem is. It can tell you where the problem is, but not necessarily what the problem is. And then also informs investment and policy decisions, very important for our space, because we are on this reform journey. We need investment, we need a change in policy. And then as almost tertiary objectives, it also tracks resilience and external shocks, very important for our scenario, and then supports efficiency, reliability, and decarbonization initiatives. 2 separate methods, a comprehensive data set that combines AIS data in a 3-pronged attack, so to speak, terrestrial, satellite, and offshore. So that is what the CPPI is. Importantly, what it isn't, what it does not measure. It is not a whole system metric. So because of the fact that it focuses exclusively on vessel time in port, it does not capture the rest of the network, the rest of the linkages, including from the water side, the maritime connectivity, the cargo dwell time, the time spent in the port, the actual operations, and then very importantly for South Africa with such a high freight demand at more than 500 billion ton kilometers per annum, it does not track hinterland, road and rail performance. And these are dimensions. First of all, the World Bank very clearly states that this is what it tracks and this is what it does not track. And importantly, to supplement this discussion, and that's what is important here to add to this case study investigation, is to get a entire view of the entire system. So the World Bank recommends that we also look at liner shipping connectivity. So how well are you connected with the rest of your trading partners? Incidentally, South Africa, the last 2 years, we've dropped in that index by more than 20%. That's starting to pick up slowly and surely. Then also, very importantly, look at the entire logistics performance index, the LPI. And incidentally, the last iteration, 2023 data, South Africa is 19th in the world. So it's important to add these additional components so that we can, with empirical analysis, with empiricism, get a whole system metric. So this is not the CPPI. Then also, as I mentioned earlier, it is very good to show you where the problem is. But the report times outcomes, it does not reveal the underlying factors and root causes of this problem. So it is not a diagnostic tool. Sensitive to shocks, limited comparability across reports. It's very curious. And the World Bank, they've admitted this to an extent, although the latest iteration, the fifth report, we look at 2020 data, the first version to 2024, it allows for trend analysis, but raw scores, they are different and they aren't directly comparable per year, but it's still useful nonetheless. And this is what is important in terms of this discussion, is that we use these international indices as part of the whole system view and analysis of what we need to do to get back to where we were and where we should be, and importantly, where we want to be. So our main critique, and this is not the point of this discussion, but it adds to the context. Our main critique is that it's a very unidimensional view of container port performance. It underweights very important aspects that forms part of the three-pillar in terms of investigate performance, which I will elaborate on later on, is that the CPPI looks exclusively at time spent by the vessels, the customers of Transnet, so to speak. But it underweights throughput, handling rate, and call size nuances, which lends itself to somewhat of a unidimensional view of performance. So, in a nutshell, what this isn't, it's not the Bible in terms of performance. So let me delve a bit deeper in terms of what performance really looks like. And why this is important for us is the fact that the CPPI generated significant attention across our network, both in the public space, the private space, but especially in the media. And a lot of the coverage just added to the critique of saying that we are on this journey, we are doing reform, we are collaborating within the various constituencies, yet the World Bank rates us at the bottom. So most of the coverage was overwhelmingly negative. And in previous iterations of this report, SAAFF tried to explain a bit of context to that. And this is not, in a sense, to critique the World Bank's report, and it's also not to cover the poor performance of the network and especially Transnet. But no, it's rather to create context so that we can have a whole system metric to look at performance. Hence, we said, hold on, we are working with important parties, both S&P Global, the World Bank, and then Transnet, to look at what port performance really means in this space. So if we delve into the report and look at where South Africa features in this report, they looked at our main container terminals, Cape Town, Coega, Durban, Pier 1 and Pier 2, and then Port Elizabeth, but to a lesser extent. And if you look at the performance, the ranking, we prop up the entire bottom of the chain. That is true. It's unequivocal. But just comparing 2023 and 2024, we see some significant improvement between Cape Town and with Cape Town and with Kuga's performance, Durban not so much. But the one critical metric that captures the essence of what this index is trying to do is to show the berth hours in terms of a percentage of port operations. So in this entire 1 to 6 steps, how much time do you actually spend at working the vessels? And this is very important because unfortunately, by the very nature of this index, it captures the entire vessel time spent in the port from anchorage, or I should rather say from arrival to anchorage, to going to the berth, and then the actual working, and then the departure process. And I want to highlight this because this is the important aspect here, is that in South Africa's experience with this measurement, we lost a lot of time in terms of not spending it at the berth, especially in Durban, but also so in Cape Town. If we compare that to the global average, is about 76%. So 3/4 of the total time a vessel is within the bounds of the ports is actually being worked. And that is important for us to, in a sense, and this is what the CPPI does do, it shows us where is the issue. It does not tell us why we have that issue, but it tells us where. Just some additional context. Red Sea crisis added a lot of further strain in 2024, and it's because of the vessel scheduling. We've seen a major diversion from the Suez Canal around the Cape of Good Hope. So we had a lot more traffic. We didn't benefit from this traffic. And also importantly, the World Bank and CPPI, they mentioned the fact that the vessel movement is not captured in our ranking. But because of the shifting schedules, that meant it was out of kilter. And we were some of the ports that fall foul of this the worst. You can read there, the CPPI, Durban and Cape Town significantly affected by longer arrival times. So again, speaking to the fact that the vessels are within our vicinity, but we are not working them. And then also, importantly, massive supply chain shock throughout the world post the pandemic from 2021. They mentioned the fact that compounded by container shortages, we can remember the empty stories, labor constraints, we had various strikes and all of that, and inland congestion, particularly in LA, Rotterdam, and Durban. And just for some context, how do we rate against our neighbors? Walvis Bay 376, Maputo 347. So within this context, bottom of the pile ranking, a lot of public furore about this, so much so that before the release of the report, Transnet and some other government constituencies actually asked the World Bank and S&P to remove South Africa from the rankings. That didn't happen. But the World Bank also, in a sense, in a response to that critique, they spent an entire page 40, to highlight some of the issues or some of the context and add to that narrative of what is happening in South Africa. Now, I just want to highlight a few. The colleagues can go and read that excerpt. But what is important is to showcase that some of the targeted actions and initiatives, they have started to yield good results. Once again, I want to frame this discussion. It's not a whole critique on the CPPI, and it's also not to back up Transnet and say, don't worry, you continue on your merry way and we'll help you and collaborate and we'll get it back to where it should be. Almost as a response, Claude earlier said to us, Transnet must die. Krish, in a sense, told it how it must die and how we must split it. But what I really want to focus here is move away from that narrative and show how we can use empiricism and proper analysis of the root causes and do a proper diagnostic of the system as a whole to see how we can improve the total functioning of this system. So just some of the highlighted improvements. Cape Town, some of the best in the world. We've added new cranes, warehousing capacity, short tensioners, predictive wind model. I don't know how that's going to help, but to mitigate some of the weather disruptions. Kuga also improved a lot. Durban benefited from initiatives, acquisition, tugboats, cranes, trailers, haulers, operational meetings. But in a nutshell, and this is once important for this narrative, is that the CPPI, this version that was released 23 September this year, looked only at 2024 data. So what I want to do for the rest of this discussion is to look at how we have improved subsequently and what further actions we must take to ensure that we get back on track. But in a nutshell, like these targeted actions have shown, we need people, we need processes, and we need infrastructure and equipment to supplement the current situation. And all of this has got a data and a technological component to that, but it's basically in those three areas in terms of to answer the question, what must happen? If we look at the global literature, and once again to frame this discussion of what the CPPI is versus what it is not, but what is proper, good port performance investigation in terms of what the international literature has showed. So the CPPI measures the vessel time spent in port based on these 6 steps. But what a collective framework for port performance actually looks like is 3 key pillars: performance, efficiency, and productivity. And what each of these mean is that, first of all, performance reflects the overall outcome of port and terminal operations across the number 1 metric, throughput volume. Now, if we look at our own network, we achieved our top throughput volumes 2017-18 at about 4.6 million TEUs. The last Transnet result, we were more than 10% down that at 4.1%, 4.1 million. So that has shown how far we have regressed, while the rest of our competitors have actually picked up our slack, eaten our lunch, so to speak. But port performance in terms of outcome at a very basic measurement, and the most important criteria is throughput volume. And that's not something that CPPI looks at. Supplementary to that, also port performance can mean the outcome of cost, doing things cheaper, the outcome of time, doing it quicker, the outcome of service and quality, how reliable is the service that South African ports provide, and then also sustainability. But what is important here in the performance pillar is that it provides a holistic assessment of how well the system meets the expectation and facilitates trade. Secondly, efficiency. That focus on process optimization from A to Z and the resource utilization in production economics. So some good examples include the arrival startup process. That's why I mentioned the fact that the CPPI should actually be the CPEI. It looks at an efficiency metric, looking at the process. Also crane and berth utilization rates, unit cost per container, and measures like that. Then in the third pillar, productivity, measures input-output ratios to quantify operational performance at granular levels. So that's really slicing deeper and deeper into the thing. How will the system perform if I add cranes, if I improve the berth, if I do things quicker? And key metrics include the moves per crane hour, gross GCH, and dwell times, and all of that. But what is important here is a diagnostic time outcome across the arrival and berth stages. Something that the CPPI measures requires complementary throughput, landside cost, quality, resilience, and a comprehensive assessment to really delve into what port performance actually means. We've done our own analysis, very kindly been supplemented by a lot of the data that Transnet has, but also our own AIS information to examine, okay, so we look at the CPPI and their results. What if we do supplementary analysis? And it is very curious that we found the very similar results in the fact that In Durban, and this is a case study on Durban, 55% of the berth hours was the component of the total time spent. It corroborates with the CPPI. It's almost the same result. Yet, our CTOC performance, so the condition of trade contracts, so that means the shipping lines coming into their berthing window as a contractual obligation with Transnet, was at 88%. So that was quite high. So once again, we corroborate with the CPPI to say that we spent, although we achieved our window, we only spent 55% of the total time working the vessel. And that means that a lot of time was lost in the system, so to speak. So there is an opportunity to delve into those process of arrival and startup to see that we have a lot of time to gain. In fact, 45% of the total time to gain. But what is important here, and adds to this discussion, is that this disparity highlights the complexity of port performance and that we need to look at factors beyond capacity, the arrival, the pilotage, the operational scheduling, all of these that have a significant influence at the total performance. If we isolate the berth versus the arrival and add a volume component, we get some critical insights into the operational efficiency and capacity constraints across South Africa's containers terminal. The arrival process, we can delve very deep into the pilotage, the communication, the tugboats, availability, the time spent at berth versus the time at anchorage. And it's important to distinguish between, are we losing it at the actual working of the vessel? How is our container handling rates? Or is it the arrival process that's way too slow? Both of our analysis and CPPI show that we can focus a lot on the arrival process to improve this entire system-wide operation. Berth operations, secondly, looks at the time spent, including the operations, the equipment, the labor productivity metrics, and all of that. Volume correlation, okay, we've looked at the process, we've looked at the working. Can we achieve the throughput levels that we need to do? And it's important to put all of these components together. But by isolating the berth hours from the total time, something that the CPPI captures in one metric, and then correlate that with the actual moves, we can better understand the true operational performance of the terminals and look at it separate from external factors like anchorage delays, pilotage, weather impacts, and all of that. And I have to admit that in the public space, and especially within some of the forums that we sit in, often we are prone to give reasons to why the performance is poor on a given day or in a given time frame. But it is very important to understand what is the actual diagnostic because of that poor performance and look away from external factors. And that's why an empirical approach to decision making is very important. To take a couple of steps back, why is logistics so important to our global or our broader economic discourse in this country? Is the fact that logistics is an enabler of the economy. Transnet has got this claim, which is a very nice one, to say that if Transnet does not move, the economy stops. That's a big claim. And perhaps speaks to the fact that we need reform and Transnet must die, Claude. But the fact is that it's not Transnet, it's logistics. If logistics stands still, the economy does not move. So logistics is a very important enabler because there is a direct positive relationship between logistics at a very practical rubber hits the road level and the socio-economic growth and development of this country. And the relationship is circular and it goes both directions, is bi-directional. So how do we do that? We delve deep into logistics processes like the World Bank has done, but supplement that with a whole system metric so that we can look at each of these different processes so that we can, at the end of the day, have an outcome where the time it takes to trade decreases, the cost it takes it decreases, the service reliability increases, and the risk increase with that. So if we take some of the performance that we have achieved to this point, and Brenda mentioned some of them, and so did Krish as well, in terms of if we compare, put 2024 aside, and we look what have we done so far, year to date 2025, based on these three pillars that I've mentioned. Performance, the most important thing, volume. Our container volume, all ports, is up financial year to date by 8.6%, which is exemplary performance, and a time to stand still and commend the collaborative efforts of not only Transnet but all of the parties involved, such as those that will hopefully form part of this container user forum. It's all of us. It's not Transnet only. It's not the transporters and other service providers. It's a collective. We need collaboration. 8.6%, the most important metric year to date. We've had some record citrus, other agri, light manufacturing doing very well. Probably by the end of the year, and I'll get to that, we won't achieve that improvement, but a significant improvement so far. As I've mentioned, vessel service, reliability, 88%. So we're hitting our windows, but the arrival process is not where it can be. So here we must work with TNPA. We must work with the pilots, the tugboats, the communication, the scheduling to get that to a better point whereby we get the berth hours up to that kind of level. Then the second pillar, efficiency. Anchorage from last year at almost on average 4%, and there you can see on the figure on your right hand side, 4 days last year down to 1.15 days on average in 2025. The CPPI mentioned it in the report, and here we can show the metrics. We've achieved a lot of reduction in anchorage, which is kudos to the entire process. That shows that what we have put in place is starting to bear fruit. Similarly, truck turnaround time at our major container terminals collectively down by 11%. So the hinterland performance, which once again the CPPI does not capture. Also crane utilization. We've invested in new equipment. We've got STS cranes, ship-to-shore cranes. We've got rubberized high gantry cranes, additional equipment at all of our major container terminals. And in fact, the new equipment utilization is continuing. Is that we've seen that up by 8, 24, and 4% respectively at these important ports, which is a great metric. Then lastly, productivity, the actual working of the vessel. If we split the two and say CPPI, 52% in Durban, our analysis 55%. So that shows that we have a significant room for improvement on the arrival process, but the actual container handling ship working hours have gone up 4, 9, 12, and 9% at our most important container terminals. It shows that these targeted initiatives are starting to bear fruit. I'm going to finish with this slide to say that in this context, some of our plans some 20 years ago said we must achieve 11.4 million TEUs by 2030. Now that's not going to happen. But what is a realistic forecast? What can this system in its current performance achieve? If we look at the global space, a lot of uncertainty, the trade, the tariffs, the scheduling, the overcapacity, we can talk at length at those issues. But the container forecast globally showed 3.2 to 4% growth rate. Our internal forecast demonstrates that South Africa can confidently achieve growth rates of 2.5 to 4.2% and even as high as 6%. Currently, year-to-date financial year, we're up 8.6%, but across the next 3 years, we can expect to touch 5 million TEUs, the most important metric, volume, throughout this network, if we continue to do what we do. Whether Transnet changes, whether PSPs and other terminal operators come in, it's very clear in terms of what we must do. If we look at it empirically, our priorities is to separate the performance and really delve deep into it, cut deep and look at which process we must do what. What is the problem of this total system? We must look at the landside performance in conjunction with the terminal, in conjunction with the marine side, and also enhance these efficiencies through tech adoptions. As I mentioned, people, processes, and infrastructure, both soft and hard, they all got a tech component, a data component, an investigative component. We have to look at that. And lastly, which is a great boon as well, in our network, we've achieved a lot more stakeholder collaboration than we have ever done, at least in my time. But for sure, the creation of CUF is another important step. And I saw in the comments, Claude said some congratulatory remarks for the creation of the CUF, because this is really where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. This is the initiatives that need to be taken forward. But for us, on a research side, we are engaging with the CEF, with Transnet, and importantly with the World Bank. We've engaged with the previous lead authors of the CPPI, Martin Humphries, with the new one, Professor Jan Hofman, global expert, to refine this methodology and to develop complementary, holistic metrics so that we really have a diagnostic tool, so that we can know where additional targeted interventions need to take place. But the truth is, and Chris alluded to a lot of this, we need to continue to prioritize investment in infrastructure, tech, that address the root causes of the delay while building the capacity to support these projected growth volumes through the next couple of years. Thank you very much for this opportunity and the time for listening to me.
Thank you, Jacob. I think you've got people are applauding, and I think I can just say to the colleagues, I'm privileged to lead this webinar today because it was full of insights. I mean, from Claude that have thought-provoking ideas, to Chris to say that no, we mustn't lose hope, there is reform, to Brenda that was coming with the evolution of the Container User Forum, and you that captured it so well in data. Yes, we know where the problem is now. It's maybe not the birth working. It seems that definitely it is the arrival process. And Brenda probably was smiling when you present the presentation, because that's what we pick up over the last couple of months in the NLCCs, that we need to optimize the birth processing and make sure that we can look at it. But I think there we were also been hampered by some of the let's say, the investment that we did not do in the pilot boats and the marine service. But I think it's also now a focus that Transnet is putting up, and hopefully it links back to what Chris was saying, that we need to do reform, and that's one of the things in the corporatization of the TNPA. So colleagues, I'm going to open for a couple of questions. If there is questions, as I said, we will not stop the conversation here. We will do podcasts. We will engage with our panelists. We will engage with Harry as well to make sure that we can make it available. But let's see if I have some hands. Harry, if you can help me there. I don't see any hands.
Let's have a look. Let's see if we've got any hands.
If there's no hands.
If there's a problem raising a hand, sometimes people struggle, then you can just unmute yourself and then we can recognize you and you can ask a question. So there's David Watts.
Thanks, Harry. Yeah, Jacob, that's fantastic. As you know, I spend most of my day staring at data from the Port of Durban, and what you put on the table supports what I've been seeing throughout 2024. 25, I should say, big improvement over 2024, far less ships at anchorage, much better performance on that side, a couple of hiccups now and again, but it's a big improvement. One thought I've got is whether there's been any, and I've asked this question of TPT before, whether there's been any real examination of an improvement of shipside performance where haulers are used instead of straddle carriers. Now we have operations, I think that's Kruger and Cape Town, where most is done with haulers alongside the vessel, whereas in Durban, or DCT at least, not Pier 1, at DCT, where straddle carriers operate. And it's always been apparent to myself and a couple of colleagues that a hauler operation alongside the ship is, if it's properly managed, is going to be a much faster turnaround performance. And I'm wondering whether any data has been put together on that. Thanks, and thanks very much, Jacob. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Dave. If I can just very briefly try to answer that question, and this perhaps speak to the holistic approach that one needs to take. The question that you're asking is quite a deep question in terms of drilling down to the actual diagnostic. And it's something most definitely the research unit and the CUF must look into. I've mentioned earlier, perhaps because of this crisis and because of the fact that collectively as a country, we find ourselves in this position to be spotlighted as the worst in the world, that we have collaborated on these issues. If I can just say our journey here, referencing the weekly report that we do with CUSA, the cargo movement report, we started out with no data. And by this point, 5 years later, a couple of months ago, and when this report was released, Transnet shared all of their data in terms of the vessel movements and the accompanying cargo handling movement to create a holistic view of the CPPI in terms of the analysis. So in a nutshell, I don't think we haven't done that analysis. I think it's a next step, so to speak. As I mentioned earlier, you know, the primary pillar is throughput. Then the next level is the efficiency metrics. Then the next level, which you are asking, is the productivity metrics. So if we compare, you know, A with B, what is the outcome? And I think that it's most definitely something that we have to do. Of course, our ports and our terminals, as you would know, and most of the colleagues in this room, they are quite unique and they operate in different models. But to use an empirical approach to get to an answer will allow you to be able to pose these hypotheses against each other and test it. I don't know what the answer is. This is a great question. But I know that you know, we need to add grains and investment and equipment to supplement the throughput. And it's curious that in the CPPI, they also showcase how what's the marginal gain per crane. There's obviously a point where you can't, for instance, Durban, let's take Pier 1. You can't just add RTGs ad infinitum. It doesn't help. You know, there's a sweet spot. So there is a point whereby the system can better operate with what it currently has. And our utilization has showed that. We're up nearly 10%. So that's most definitely a next step that we can do. And I hope I've given enough context in this space to attempt to answer that. In short, we haven't done it, but we must and we could and we should.
Okay, Jacob, we shoot. Okay. Brenda, I don't know if you want to compliment, but I know you were very working in Belgium as well, and you look at the Cape Town setup. I don't know if you want to comment something, and then I'm going to ask Claude to close for us, because he started, and I think it's just good if we give him the opportunity to close for us, Harry, before we say goodbye.
Thank you.
Hi, Anita. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm too quick on you, so I'm not sure. The question was in terms of the hauliers versus the straddle carriers and the RTGs. So I don't know if you have a quick solution. Yeah.
The RTGs are your best option, but they work with a combination. Your straddle carrier takes long to get, so the most efficient terminals use the RTG. The tractor trailer thing, it works for smaller terminals, but it's not ideal for bigger terminals because of the distance, and it kills the equipment. It's not ideal.
Perfect. So with that, colleagues, I'm not sure, as I said, to promise, we will make sure that we engage with you on podcasts and have some questions for the panelists and take it further, because we're really serious about the reform agenda, because we want to bring in different roles and responsibility and sustainability, and also stay to make sure that South Africa is not always in a crisis, but that we can say we are building SA Inc. So Claude, maybe you have for us one good thought that you can leave us with, and then we can close the session. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I do, because I am very pleased I stayed, and I listened to 3 excellent presentations, which really complement each other. And Brenda, I mean, my congratulations. What you're doing is exactly what I had in mind when I spoke about institutionalizing reform, and your work is phenomenal. And not just the substantive work, but the way you're describing it and you're explaining it. Because it's not just, what you're doing is not just producing results, you are also doing education. Your material is wonderfully educational. And when I was looking at it, I had an idea, and I immediately messaged Juanita to say, well, we need to take some of that, we need to package it to spread the good news and the model, right? Because the more structured you are, the more stakeholders are involved, and the more performance metrics there is, the stronger you embed reform, because you're showing results, and you are taking away ownership of the processes and the outcome away from those who might change and might have different agendas. You're taking that away from them, and you are making it very, very difficult for them to then go against it. So this is reform embeddedness in the best way. And so that's one thought, and we need to tell your story and then learn to replicate it. The other very inspiring, I mean, sorry, Krishna, your explanation of the reform process is also very good. And I'm very impressed by that. So really, I think there's also a story that needs to be pushed out there. I do disagree with one thing you said. I want to say, we can move on from politics. No, reform is politics. You show what reform is. It's about changing roles and responsibilities and who invests and who operates. And therefore, it's a fundamental political object. I'll go back to my doctoral dissertation in defense. And a long time ago now, and one of my examiners said to me, it was in 98, 99, and it was in the most powerful moment of the World Bank, the IMF, and structural adjustment. And they had a kind of view that it's just natural market forces. This is not political. And so my examiner said, and I was focused on reform in Africa. And she asked me, she said, you can only say yes or no, but is reform a political object or not? And I said, yes, reform is fundamentally political because you're taking away from some and you're giving to others. And if you go back to the great American political scientists of the early 20th century, Harold Laswell, he said politics is about who gets what, when, and how. Right? And so logistics, transport, infrastructure are objects of competition, not just economic competition, but of socio-political competition. So as much as you as operators not to have to deal with politics, you want to deal with performance. You have to be organized, and this is the idea, Juanita, I had in mind. We have to start thinking about what is the organizational structure of reform. Who does what? And Brenda, you've touched on that by explaining, who does what in your structure. Who at the board level is in charge of engagement and policy making and lobbying. And then further down the operations. What you want to do is you want to have that organizational structure very, very clear on who is operational and who is tactical on the ground and who is strategic. And whatever is strategic is fundamentally political. So I would like to propose that maybe we put some sort of thinking together about that and how we communicate about it and replicate your model. You are in politics. You all are. Business is politics. The last point I'd like to make then is what Jacob's done. So I must say, a little secret is that I helped Jacob complete his PhD. He was drowning in it. And you all remember he had that mop of hair on his head. And he told me years ago, that until he has his PhD completed, he'll keep his hair. And I said to him, boy, we are going to get that haircut very soon. And so we got him through his PhD. I take a bit of credit for that. But wow, very, very good, Jakob, very impressive. And what I'm thinking is, how do we then, because that's also about reinforcing the reform agenda, is how do we take your performance data and how do we link that back to economic and social outcomes so that we can do exactly what you guys have said, is how do you explain to the voters and how do you explain to the businesses and how do you explain to the people who eventually will be your allies and labor, and translate and political parties that what is being done is having a direct economic impact. So how do we take operational performance, logistics system performance, and how do we then make it directly that we add economic social progress variables to it, and we create equations that allow us to understand how moving the dial on one positively affects the other one. So we can also measure that and we can reinforce the reform agenda. Thank you.
Claude,
So
thank you very much. Thank you. Colleagues, and with that, I'm going to close the session. I think Claude is giving us a couple of things to work on with the Rosita, and I think we will definitely take up the task because we want to make sure the slide that Chris has shown with all the red blocks and the blue, how we can make it work, and then we box in a container the picture that Brenda have, and then ultimately what Jakob told us so nicely, and Claude as well, we want to make sure that we codify the message correctly, we bring it back to empirical data, and I hope you enjoyed the session with me as I enjoyed. I know I was a moderator, but it's for me brilliant to work with such a panelist. And Harry, I think we as South Africa can never say enough of what you've done with this platform, because you bring all of us together, different thoughts, different backgrounds, but somehow you all connect us always in a collaborative approach. So thank you very much with that. And colleagues, I want to close the session and say, enjoy a lovely Thursday afternoon and much appreciated. See you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Brenda, for being a great host. Really appreciate it. Have a